right, welcome to a very special episode of the Game Dev Cafe. We are getting to know our sister studio today, Lightning Rod Games. We have never really been allowed to talk about what Lightning Rod Games is working on, not because they aren't doing something very exciting, but today we're going to get our first look at A Fold Apart. So thank you so much, Mark Laframboise and Stephen Smith, for joining us. These are the two co-founders of Lightning Rod Games. Now, Mark and Stephen are joining us today just to give a little bit of an introduction to A Fold Apart and the FIG campaign that they have just launched. The crowdfunding campaign launched just this week, and it's going to run through July. But today we're going to learn a little bit more about the game and, basically why they're raising some funds to make it better. So thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Hey, thank you.
And I guess the first thing we'll start off with is, figuring out what this game is about. We haven't been able to say very much. I know that you've just released a preview trailer, which is live now at fig.co/afoldapart. But Mark, why don't you start by telling us what is A Fold Apart?
Sure, yeah, okay. So, in a nutshell, A Fold Apart is a 3D puzzle game about a long-distance relationship in a world of folding paper. So you have these two characters. There's an architect and a teacher, and they are kind of split apart due to circumstances within their career. So like the architect has gotten a job in a different city and has had to move away. And so what the game is exploring is the struggles of being apart from someone that you love and the ways that you communicate and sometimes miscommunicate with one another when you're in that situation, as well as just the ways that you kind of work through the feelings of, what it feels like when you're apart from someone, that you really don't really want to be apart from them, and it's just kind of that desire to merge your worlds together. And so the gameplay sort of reinforces that. So we use paper folding as a kind of a metaphor for this long distance relationship, kind of being apart from someone. Because if you take a piece of paper and you had a character on one side of a piece of paper and a character on the other, they're in different worlds and they can't get to one another. But if you fold that paper, you can merge their two worlds together and create a pathway for them to get there. So all of our puzzles in the game are using this kind of paper folding mechanic of folding, flipping, unfolding the paper to create pathways for a character to get from one place to another.
Very cool, and definitely novel, something that I don't think people have really seen out there on the market, both in terms of certainly the storyline, a long-distance relationship, but also the mechanic, folding paper. So something kind of different and unique. I know that the trailer has just released. We sort of have it playing in the background. You guys can go check it out now at fig.co/afoldapart if you want to see the full experience. But interestingly, the trailer starts with some of the accolades that the game has already received. This is the first time the public is getting a taste of it, but it has been shown in the past. Stephen, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about some of the awards that the game has already received and basically the recognition that it's already getting?
Yeah, sure. So first, we're thrilled whenever anyone talks about the game because it's nice to see that anybody cares. Because when you start out making these things, you don't know if it's like just for you or if anyone else is going to like get it. So seeing the feedback, especially the recent feedback, has been really, really touching. The first recognition we got was our acceptance into the experimental gameplay workshop, which was really important to us because it's such a it's this big talk that closes out the game developers conference every year, and it's just people demonstrating these really weird and different ideas that aren't like anything else you see in the games industry. So it was a big inspiration for us to make the game, and then being selected to show there, it meant a lot. Especially reading people's feedback on the presentation afterwards was a huge boost to team morale. Just as big a boost to team morale, I think, was also recently showing at PAX East. The really strong response from players actually, I got kind of overwhelmed a couple of times because people reacted so much more strongly to the themes and the art and the music than I was expecting them to.
Very nice. And was PAX sort of then the first time that this was sort of the game being shown to the public? Was that your first opportunity to get that kind of feedback?
Yeah, it was the first time we'd ever put it really in front of real players. When I say real players, like we have other game developers play it, we have testers play it, right. But it's always a very like business, we're all game developers sort of like setting. And at PAX, people they don't know who you are. They don't care. You're just sort of like getting pulled out of the crowd, or they're seeing something that piqued their interest and they're coming over to check it out. So it felt very honest and unfiltered for some of them.
Definitely, which is scary, but as you say, it kind of had good results, so it's encouraging in that sense.
Oh yeah, oh sorry.
I was just gonna say I really understand sort of once people see the game, their ability to relate to it. It sounds kind of crazy when you describe it initially, but then when you sort of see it in action, I think it starts to make a lot of sense.
When people found out that it was based on Mark's long-distance relationship, he got told a lot of life stories at PAX.
Mark knows all your secrets. Actually, the paper folding is a pretty cool metaphor for the long-distance relationship element. I guess I'm curious how you guys first came up with this whole idea. Like, was this a game that you guys had already conceived and have just been waiting your whole lives to build, or did this come from sort of cobbling together different ideas? You guys started the studio all by yourselves and it's completely independent, so I'd love to know sort of the genesis of a fold apart.
Sure. Yeah, well, Stephen touched on it a little bit. The core idea for the game was based on my own long-distance relationship that I had with my wife, Robin. So before starting Lightning Rod Games, I was working in California at Disney, and my wife was still in Ontario teaching. And so we were apart for about a year and a half, and that was really hard. It really, really sucked. There was a lot of times where it was like a lot of ups and downs being apart from each other. Now, thankfully, I've been back for about 3 years now, so it's really nice now. But I always really wanted to make a game that kind of explored those emotions of being apart from someone, because it's not something you really see. You don't really see it in like media in general, but you definitely don't see it in games. And I thought that would make a really cool game story. But I really wanted to make a game that had mechanics that also kind of reflected this idea of a long distance relationship. I didn't want to just do it a story.
Right.
But I didn't really know how at first. So it was kind of it didn't come together right away when we started forming the studio. It was more like that was something I wanted to do ever since we started the studio, but it wasn't like immediate. Like this is how we're going to do it. And it was after experimental gameplay workshop that Steve and I attended a few years ago. We were kind of like trying to brainstorm. We're like, oh, what are some cool mechanics that we haven't seen in a game before? Not necessarily for this idea, but just in general, like things that we could do.
Right.
And Steven had this idea of like the back of a Mad magazine. It's like where you fold it and you make a picture. And I was like, oh, that's neat. Like I didn't see how it was a game right away, but it was like, that's neat. Like paper folding isn't something that you see in games very often. So it kind of just stuck in my head, kind of in the back burner. And it was probably a few months later that I was like, oh, we can actually combine these. Like you can use paper folding as a way to kind of build out this idea of being apart, kind of like what I was explaining, where like the sides of paper where two characters are separated. And I thought that was really great. I thought it was a really cool way to merge the two ideas together.
Yeah, I can still remember you calling me up on the Google Hangout, being like really excited, being all like, I've got it. And like, I didn't know what you were talking about because it had been a while until you stuck like a piece of paper in front of the webcam. And we're like, there's a guy here, and then you fold this over there, and then he walks across. And I was just like, oh, okay. And like, we knew we had something right there.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a very seamless metaphor, but it's interesting to know that it didn't sort of, come easily, I guess. And I kind of feel better knowing that it didn't. You guys had to struggle to get here. That's important.
Yeah.
Was the paper folding element sort of difficult then to build? Because it sounds like it was a great idea in its conception, but it certainly didn't exist. So how did you kind of make it so?
So Stephen touched on this a little bit. Like when I pitched the idea, like the cool thing about the game in general is the whole thing can be paper prototype. It's like the best kind of example of a game that can be paper prototype because it's based on paper. So I can make every single one of the levels on graph paper and like kind of design it, put like where all the blocks are and supposed to be.
Right.
And I can do like the folding on paper and just kind of test out the puzzle solutions. Like the characters obviously won't move, but you can kind of envision how everything's going to get laid out once we build it in the game. But I think taking it from it works on paper. I can draw a level in like a minute and get it working and have like this idea. But yeah, there's a bigger step between that and getting it working in the game engine.
Right.
I'll let Steven speak to that. That's been significantly more complicated, I think.
Yeah, it's so paper prototyping is awesome because you can move really fast. But the thing a lot of people don't know about video games is that like a lot of the visuals are just tricks. Like you'd be super weirded out if you saw what was going on behind the scenes in most video games. So our paper folding's no different. It's all just tricks to make this thing look like paper. So one of the troubles there is it's hard to keep up with the design because you'll build something. It's like, okay, we can use this trick to achieve this effect and get these gameplay mechanics to work. And then we'll learn something or we'll change something or we'll make like a decision that seems like really simple if you're just putting papers um, on a table and moving them around. And then it's like, oh, this introduces so many more problems on the coding end. So that sort of thing will like necessitate a big sort of rewrite. And so it's this balance of the code trying to keep up with the design and then the design reacting to the code and like seeing how it plays, and then the design changes because as soon as you get that thing implemented and you're able to put it in front of players and you see how they react, it might not be at all what you thought it was.
Right.
So design will say is like, oh, well, we can just try this, and this thing, and then it's the to try to change the back end to sort of build it and come up with new tricks.
So kind
Well,
of
yeah, 'cause
a
the
grand
original-
experiment a little bit. A lot
Yeah.
of unknowns.
That's
the original design was every puzzle was just contained to a single paper, right? Like you would
Yeah.
only see in that paper and you flip and fold it. It's like the concept of like traveling from paper to paper to paper was something that kind of came out organically of us playing the game and realizing that we wanted to have kind of a more ongoing story kind of narrative
Right.
feel to the game where it's like you're progressing. But yeah, like that ability to go from like one paper to the other, which looks like super, super cool. Now that it's implemented, it was like that was a big kind of change to the foundation of the game that Steven had to kind of figure out how to do.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
another thing inside baseball for video game development is that there's a concept of like workflow that people outside the games industry don't quite like. Well, they'd never have to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we had everything that was just a single paper, it meant that design could build a puzzle and then art could just take that puzzle and sort of decorate it.
Do it.
But
Yeah.
then when there's this concept of a whole bunch of papers strung together, it means that the artists need to figure out a way to sort of work together without stepping on each other's toes. And then the technology needs to respond to not just change the way the game is built, but also change the way the game is built in a way to help the artists do their work.
Right. Interesting. And I know the game is built in Unity, but there's all kinds of other tools being pulled into play here, as you say, to kind of hide how the sausage is made. Is there anything that people would recognize beyond Unity that's gone into this game?
One thing that's a little bit different about our studio is we're big fans of Blender. It's an open source 3D modeling suite, and we use Blender for modeling and animation. And a lot of people look at Blender, or at least used to look at Blender, like it wasn't a professional tool. But we did a full evaluation of several of the most popular tools out there, and for us, Blender was great.
Interesting.
So shout out to Blender.
Awesome. Very cool. And I guess, getting to sort of the meat of the matter, you guys have just launched a FIG campaign, which is a crowdfunding platform that's focused on games, just in case our viewers aren't familiar. It's actually a really sort of selective platform. It doesn't have a lot of games running at once, so it's really cool that you guys are up and being featured there. But I am curious, given that sort of a lot of the, I would say, blood, sweat, and tears of the game have sort of happened already. What is it that you guys are crowdfunding for at this point? Where will the FIG campaign funds go when it comes to a fold apart?
No, that's a good question. So we're fortunate enough to have been partnered with some of the government funding in Canada. So the Canada Media Fund and the Ontario Media Development Corporation. So vast majority of the game is already funded. So what we're trying to do now is get those funds to really finish the game, really polish it off, really make it work on as many platforms as we can to get it in front of as many players as we can.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where this extra funding at the end here is mostly for. So what we're primarily doing is we're adding like we want to add a little bit more polish on the animations and things like cutscenes and stuff like that to kind of help reinforce that story. We want to get finalize the sorry, I'm trying to think of the way to word that. So the optimize like the for the platforms. So we want to be able to launch like on the Switch, on the PS4, on the Xbox.
Nice.
Ideally, I'd like to also launch as early as we can on Mac OS 10 and Linux.
Great.
So those probably won't be at launch, but we're trying to get them as close to launch as we can. So the idea is to get all of these things coming out, and then obviously PC Windows is kind of like our main development platform right now.
Mm-hmm.
But to have all of those platforms come out as closely together as possible, if not the same day, it's kind of like our ongoing goal. So being able to kind of get those dev kits, get things kind of rolling on the optimization side of things,
Mm-hmm.
is one of the other things that we're looking for.
Very cool.
So the cool thing on this is that we're not asking for money with like an unknown date. Like we have our release date. Our release window is February 2019. So we're aiming for Valentine's Day because it feels like that's like a really appropriate. It's a really appropriate time to launch the game. But yeah, so people who want to back the game on Fig, like there's a game coming out 8 months from now. So it's a very, I would say it's a safer investment in some ways than some other games that you kind of see on crowdfunding where it's like, who knows, they don't really know when it's coming out. It might be coming out sometime in the future. This is very concrete. We have, like I said, we have pretty much the funding to finish the majority of the game. We're just kind of looking for that additional amount to kind of polish it off and make it the best game that we possibly can.
Awesome. Very cool. And the crowdfunding window I know runs through July 19th. So there's still some time. People can go and check it out. I guess if people do have questions about the crowdfunding or the campaign at all, I know on the fig.co website there is sort of a question and answer section. Obviously, Lightning Rod Games is all over social media. They're pretty easy to find. So I would certainly encourage anyone who has other questions about how this campaign is being run or sort of where the funds are being used. Absolutely, we're all ears at all times. I am interested to know what you guys think is the best way for people to support this game. Obviously, crowdfunding is nice, money is very good, but aside from actually investing or pledging their support on the Fig platform, what are some other ways that people can help support the making of a fold apart?
The biggest thing that I'm looking for is just help spreading the word that this game is out there, and not just like sharing a link, but if you like the game, call out sort of like what you like about it. A lot of people that saw it at PAX reacted to different things. It might have been the relationship theme. They don't see a lot of games about relationships or long distance relationships, or they really love the art, or they really love the music, or they really like the ability to select your couple. Mm-hmm. And if that's something you're interested in, if those are the types of games you want to see made, just tell people about it. It's a little thing, but it helps a lot. And there's all kinds of little things that help get the word out, like retweeting and liking tweets, thumbs upping videos, like and subscribe and all that business, because it actually helps in the big machines that are the social media networks. It helps pump the message to the top. And it's like people don't realize that those little things have an effect, but if a lot of people do them, it has a really big effect in amplifying the game.
That's very true, and it does get back to the developers clearly. You guys are watching and listening, and it's not sort of an echo chamber when it comes to developing this type of game, certainly, but this kind of game and this kind of studio are able to kind of take feedback and apply it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, if people have questions, just ask us. Like we're out there.
Very cool.
We're easy to reach.
I really like another thing I really like hearing, and Steven talked about this, there's people at PAX telling me these stories too, is like anytime like someone who's been in a long distance relationship kind of tells me like whether or not the story is like, well, from what I've heard, most people seem to think that it's kind of very closely reflects their own feelings, which is always good to hear, because I'm like, I want to try to make sure that the game, the emotional impact of the narrative and everything is resonating with people who have been in a long distance relationship especially, but also make it in a way that is relatable to someone who maybe hasn't been but understands, like, can kind of picture the emotion of being apart from someone. And and put them in their shoes and have them have a very similar, strong emotional reaction to the story is kind of something that I am trying to do. So like getting feedback on that is always really, really helpful.
Definitely. And it is a story, having seen a little bit of it myself, and I know because I work with your studio, it's something that's relatable even if you haven't experienced sort of that depth of a relationship before, because I appreciate not everyone has sort of had that type of experience. But just the universal sort of feelings of longing and when you're separated from something that you don't want to be separated from, and how that can sort of play with your heartstrings a little bit, that really comes across in the game. And I agree, I think it's great to hear feedback from people who can relate to it, even if it's not in the exact same way as what the game was designed for. It's a very human game in that sense.
Yeah.
Cool. I am curious, sort of on the human note, it's based on your real life relationship, and I know
Yeah.
Mark and Robin very well. They're married quite happily. But I'm curious what Robin thinks about this. She's sort of, the basis for a video game that people are so far, having great reactions to. What does she think?
She thinks it's super cool that there's a character in a video game that's like based on her. It's like, she's a pretty big nerd. You can see some of that all that Night Before Christmas stuff behind me is all Robin. So um, she's about as big of a nerd as I am about a lot
Nice.
of this stuff. So she's really excited about seeing like a video game that's based on our story. It's very cool. And then actually, I know we haven't really talked about this, but I feel like we take it for granted internally on the studio because it's like so natural to us. But I'm like, I want to actually emphasize this because I think it's something that's actually really important to us.
Mm-hmm.
Is the idea that it's based on mine and Robin's experience, but we wanted to make the game as accessible as possible to anyone. So one thing that we let players do is choose the gender of both the architect and the teacher, and you can mix and match them in whatever combination you want, because we really wanted just the game to be as universal as possible. Like love is universal, and so we wanted people to be able to make the game about their own story, regardless of whatever combination of genders or sexual preference or whatever that they personally have or they want to see the story of. So
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, that's something really important to us as a studio. So
it's a
Yeah.
nice message, and I know from seeing some people's reactions, it is something that is like a small touch, because it's not a heavy-handed part of the game. The game itself is still sort of a similar experience, but being able to personalize it that way, and I guess see yourself better represented in a video game, no matter what the game is sort of a very special moment for most players.
Yeah, there was actually one thing that Robin called out specifically that she was excited about. She really liked that you could play as a couple where the woman was very tall, like taller than
yeah, and
Robin's very tall.
she's taller than me. So we intentionally made the teacher character taller than the architect to kind of add that as kind of like a personal touch to the character design there. So.
It's really cute. And once you start to get to know the characters and sort of their career paths and their personality traits, you see a lot of that reflected. So it's clear that it was based on a really cute and loving real life story. I think that's obvious. But as you say, it's something that a lot of different people can relate to, whether it's sort of a romantic relationship, even a friendship, a pen pal situation. Yeah, this has a lot of universal feelings of just caring about someone else. It's a really lovely game. Well, thank you guys so much for taking some time to introduce the Fold Apart to us. There's a lot more to learn about this game, particularly, Stephen, who's responsible for some of the more technical programming components. We would love to have you back. We'll talk a little bit more about how this crazy mechanic was developed, the genesis from experimental gameplay workshop right up until all the crazy animations that are going into the game now. Mark, obviously, we'd love to hear more about you and Robin. So I know that there's a lot more of the story between you moving away for Disney, but we'll get more of that detail later.
Sure.
As well as I think some of the artistic, not just inspiration, but iteration that went into the game, because this game has come a long way for some of our press and influencer contacts who may have seen the game early on. It looks very different now,
Or
and
even what we presented at the experimental gameplay workshop.
that's
That was like
true.
that art style and this art style are very, very different.
And that wasn't that long ago. So I think it's safe to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is sort of the final art style that we're putting forward. And I think it's beautiful. I know that the audience so far has been really happy with it, and it just looks great on the Fig campaign page. So Great work, guys. I look forward to talking with you again. If anyone is interested, again, you can ask Lightning Rod Games questions pretty much on any social outlet, but certainly on the fig.co/afoldapart page, there's a whole question and answer section that would be great to get some questions specific to the campaign. Otherwise, Mark and Stephen, I guess the last sort of question I might have for you is when people might expect to first see a demo of the game, because I know part of the campaign is actually getting access before the launch. So as part of sort of the backer rewards, if you're interested, you can actually get your hands on a demo of this game sooner. My understanding is that that might be before February. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, it'll be before the launch of the game for sure. I feel like very highly confident it'll be in January. We are trying to get it out as early as we can. I don't want to say before Christmas. I want to say before Christmas, but I don't want to actually.
We want to, but we don't want to. Well, the important thing there is that
I'm trying. Our internal goal is to try to get it in people's hands potentially before Christmas, but January for sure.
Awesome.
And that's definite. We'll have it in January for sure.
That's great. And
as the tech person,
I'm making promises, and Stephen has to like.
Yeah, I just want to put out there that it'll come out when we've got a way that we know that your save games will carry over from the preview to the full one, and it's not going to mess anything up.
We want to make sure the player experience is solid. Yeah. The reason I bring it up is that I'm sure that there's a few people who might be interested in streaming this game, watching it. Something that we get asked a lot at Game Dev Cafe every time we feature a game. So if you're interested in supporting the game and you'd like to become an early backer, that's one way to make sure that you get that first copy.
Yeah, because we'll let, once we get those demos, that's fully streamable. Like we have no restrictions on what people want to show with it and stuff like that.
Very cool, very cool. Well, thank you again, Mark and Stephen. We will be hearing a lot more from Lightning Rod Games and a lot more about A Fold Apart in the near future. But for now, if you're interested, please head over to fig.co/afoldapart. You can read all about the game, all about the cool rewards. We didn't even talk about that. We'll get to that next. But yeah, check out the game. Let us know what you think. And thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, Karina.